Hello there. Thank you very much to everyone listening. And we really appreciate your attendance and your time. I'm Jesus Rodriguez, and today we're going to be working with the natural approach in terms of teaching methods for a second or a foreign language. I would also like to thank my colleague Francisco Martinez for the development of this video. So first of all, this approach is a foreign languages teaching methodology, which at the same time was based on the language acquisition theory by the linguists Stephen Krashen and Tracy Terrell. That was done at the end of the 70s and in the early 80s last century. We have to consider that this is based on the naturalistic principles that states the importance of a stimulation of a second language as it was done with the first language, with the mother tongue, as it was done when the learners or the users were kids. So, by the usage of this communication, which is mostly through the listening, the exposure of a learner makes them able to decipherate and to start giving meaning to words, to phrases, to language in general. So the natural learning approach is based on observing the environment, the atmosphere, and analyzing this way the student's context. So this way, we seek to prevent students from acquiring just theoretical knowledge, which is going to be disconnected to real and meaningful practice. And instead, what it promotes is that they can independently apply what they learn in everyday, regular situations. So, as said before, we need to consider that this approach aims to make students learn the second language as they did with their own. So, it establishes that the mother tongue is not used in the classroom. That's one of the most important principles because we are just focusing on the target language. The lexicon exposure should be one of the most common practices as well, since we're looking for this vocabulary development. We also need to consider the diversity of activities which are eventually leading to comprehensibility and usefulness of language. Observation and interpretation are some of the most common practices in the role of a student since they are just like interpreting a lot. Formal organization, which could be called the grammar or the structure, is not a main emphasis. It's not emphasized or is not one of the main points. And we also need to consider then by result that the speaking skills, mostly the listening, are going to be a main concern. And well, the speaking is going to be developed eventually. Well, Stephen Krashen created this book, which is called The Natural Approach, and in there, he with his colleagues presented the hypotheses. There are five key hypotheses that we need to have or to bear in mind when we talk about this approach. First off, is the learning or the acquisition hypothesis, which differentiates between the learning that results from formal study and acquisition, which arises from a natural way of learning a language. Then we have to consider the monitor hypothesis, which proposes that the conscious learning acts only as a corrector or monitor of a speech, but they are not as an initial generator. So here we talk about the unconsciousness of the learning being mostly the most realistic or the important when we talk about this method. Then we have to consider the third one, which is called the natural order hypothesis, that talks about the language acquisition following a predictable order, regardless of former teaching or mother tongue. And then we have to consider one of the most typical or spoken elements, which is the inputs. The hypothesis talks about the new linguistic element, which is called the input, favoring the acquisition of language. However, although it is necessary, it's not sufficient on its own to learn the language. So we need some more stimuli. And then we have to finish with the affective filter hypothesis, which is very important because that talks about or states that the emotional factors are also implying how or if the student learns. Well, overall, we could say that this exposure to comprehensible and meaningful language makes the students easily understand and they prioritize the communication and meaning over grammatical accuracy or correctness. We also can consider that the relaxed environment it's mainly done because that reduces the anxiety and makes the students be more productive. Some activities or the task suggestions that we have is to start lessons with certain words, sets or phrases, or audio materials that would place them into comprehensible input. Then we have to present lessons given with different kinds of visual materials, such as pictures or flashcards, for the exposure of vocabulary development. For practice, the students can get to listen and to read so they can get familiar with new language. The production is going to be delayed considering that the speech, based on what Krashen said, is going to develop eventually. So, with that being said, that would be all. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you really got to enjoy this. Thanks a lot.